A young boy sitting in a crowded courtroom suddenly raises his hand and points directly at a decorated police officer. His next words send shockwaves through the room, unraveling a truth no one saw coming. What was supposed to be a routine trial takes an unexpected turn, exposing a hidden corruption that could shake the entire justice system. What did the boy reveal? Stay with us to find out, and let us know in the comments where you're watching this story unfold. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The grand wooden chamber of the Chicago Criminal Court was packed. Reporters, legal observers, and members of the public sat shoulder to shoulder, eager to witness the fate of Daniel Grayson. A 28-year-old black handyman from Southside Chicago. He sat at the defendant's table, hands clasped tightly, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and quiet desperation. Daniel had been accused of a violent mugging that left Eleanor McCarthy, an elderly woman, hospitalized with broken ribs and a stolen purse. The prosecution had built a convincing case, surveillance footage from a blurry street camera, a witness who claimed to have seen a man running away, and Daniel's past financial struggles, all painting him as the perfect suspect. He was a black man from a working-class neighborhood, and to many in the system, that was enough. The prosecutor, a confident and well-groomed man named Richard Colton, made sure the jury saw not a struggling worker trying to make ends meet, but a dangerous criminal. His voice rang with certainty as he outlined the charges, describing Daniel as someone desperate enough to turn to violence. Sitting in the back row, Angela Peterson, a grocery store owner in her mid-30s, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She hadn't wanted to be here. She hadn't actually seen the crime, only glimpsed shadows moving outside her store window. But she had been called to testify. Beside her, her 5-year-old son Noah played quietly with a small toy truck, his little fingers guiding it along the wooden bench. The judge, an older woman with a firm but fair demeanor, tapped her gavel and called for order. Just then, a side door opened and several Chicago Police Department officers entered the room. They moved with authority, their presence a reminder of the law's power. Among them stood Lieutenant Marcus Holt, a broad-shouldered, decorated officer with a reputation for keeping the streets clean. Lieutenant Holt was respected, even feared. He had solved major cases, taken down dangerous criminals, and was known for his no-nonsense approach to justice. He was also a white officer in a system that had long been accused of disproportionately targeting black men. To the jury, his presence signaled security, reassurance that the right person was in custody. Noah, who had been focused on his toy, suddenly stopped, his fingers loosened, and the truck tumbled to the floor with a soft clatter. Angela had turned to him, surprised, but his small face had gone pale, his brown eyes fixed on Lieutenant Holt. The courtroom carried on, lawyers debating, the jury listening. But Noah was no longer a passive observer. A small breath hitched in his throat, then in a voice clear and unwavering, he spoke. "I saw him." The words sliced through the air, silencing the courtroom. Heads turned, searching for the source of the voice. The judge hesitated, eyes scanning the room until she found the little boy, his small hand now pointing directly at Lieutenant Holt. "He was there," Noah said. Angela's breath caught. She felt a cold wave wash over her as she turned to her son. "Noah, what are you talking about?" She whispered, gripping his shoulders. But the boy didn't waver. For the first time that day, Daniel Grayson lifted his head. His lawyer stopped mid-sentence. The prosecutor, who had been flipping through his notes, froze. The officers near Holt exchanged glances, their trained eyes reading every subtle cue in his stance. Lieutenant Holt remained motionless. His face didn't change, but those who looked closely saw the subtle tightening of his jaw, the flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. The silence in the courtroom stretched unbearably long. Then Holt took a single step backward, a barely perceptible movement. But to those watching, it was unmistakable. A retreat. The judge tapped her gavel, breaking the irrequiet. "We'll take a short recess." Chaos erupted. Lawyers whispered hurriedly. The press scrambled, typing furiously. Spectators murmured, trying to process what had just happened. As the courtroom emptied for recess, Angela clutched Noah's hand. She hadn't understood what had just happened. But something about the way Holt had stepped back sent an undeniable chill down her spine. A minute later, a court official approached Angela, asking her to step into a side consultation room with her son. She hesitated, but before she could refuse, the prosecutor, Richard Colton, appeared. His sharp eyes flickered toward Noah. "I'd like to speak with both of you." Angela's first instinct was to refuse, to take her son and leave. But something inside her, the fear in her gut, the way the other person was. The officers had looked to Holt, made her nod. Inside a dimly lit office, they sat across from Colton. Noah clutched his toy truck, his small fingers wrapped tightly around it. The prosecutor exhaled through his nose, tapping his fingers against the desk as he studied the boy. "Noah," he began, his voice measured. "Can you tell me what you saw?" Noah glanced at his mother, as if seeking approval. Angela, her pulse pounding, gave him a small nod. "I saw him that night," Noah said simply. "By Mommy's door." Colton leaned forward slightly. "You mean the night of the attack?" Noah nodded. The prosecutor frowned. What was he doing? Noah's small brows furrowed as he tried to recall. He was by the alley. There was a car, a black one. He was talking to someone. Then he got in and drove away. Angela's breath caught in her throat. She had seen a car that night, too. A sleek black vehicle idling for a few minutes before vanishing. She had assumed it was just another late-night customer. But now, Colton's expression hardened. He turned to his assistant. "Pull up the surveillance footage from near the store." Minutes later, in a small office filled with flickering screens, they watched grainy nighttime footage. A black car rolled into view, parking near the alley beside Angela's store. The timestamp matched the time of the attack on Eleanor McCarthy. Angela gripped Noah's hand. "That's the car," he whispered. They watched as a tall figure stepped out. The footage was blurry, but the way he moved, his posture, it was eerily familiar. The man spoke to someone in the shadows, gestured with his hands. Less than a minute later, he got back into the car and drove away. Colton's face was unreadable. He turned to his assistant. "Do we have a plate number?" She hesitated. "The quality isn't great, but we're enhancing it." Angela felt her chest tighten. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. Then the assistant spoke again, more hesitantly this time. "There's another camera angle from closer to the alley. If we can access it, we might get a clearer shot of his face." Colton nodded. "Pull whatever you can. I want answers by tonight." Angela looked down at Noah, who was staring at the frozen image on the screen. His little hands trembled slightly, but his face remained steady. Colton turned to her. "Angela, I need you to be completely honest with me." His voice was calm but firm. "Have you ever seen Lieutenant Holt near your store before?" Angela hesitated. Had she? Then she remembered months ago on a quiet evening. A black car had idled across the street. She noticed it because it lingered just a little too long. At the time, she hadn't thought anything of it. Her stomach twisted. "I don't know," she admitted, "but now I think I might have." Colton exhaled through his nose. If Holt was there that night, if he was involved, this changes everything. Angela's fingers tightened around Noah's. His small voice whispered beside her. "Told you, Mama." On the screen, the image of the black car remained frozen in time. Angela's heart pounded as she sat in the small office, gripping Noah's hand tightly. The weight of what her son had just revealed settled heavily on her chest. Lieutenant Marcus Holt, a respected cop, a man trusted to uphold justice, had been near the crime scene on the night of the attack. And Noah had seen him. The prosecutor, Richard Colton, exhaled slowly, his fingers drumming against the desk as he processed the information. If he was there, if he was involved, he said, choosing his words carefully, "This could mean Daniel Grayson is innocent." Angela swallowed hard. The thought made her stomach twist. An innocent black man was sitting in that courtroom fighting for his life, while the real culprit might have been the very man meant to protect the city. Colton's assistant returned her face tight with urgency. "We pulled the closer camera footage," she said, setting a laptop on the desk and clicking through the files. The grainy black and white video played on the screen. The same black car rolled into the frame, its sleek surface gleaming under the dim street lights. The timestamp matched the time of the attack. Then the driver's side door opened. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out. The resolution wasn't perfect, but the photo was very clear. The face that turned toward the camera was unmistakable. Holt. The room fell silent. Angela felt her breath catch. Colton's jaw clenched as he leaned in, studying the footage frame by frame. Jesus, he muttered. His assistant spoke again, hesitant. There's more. We checked his financial records. She clicked a few more times, pulling up a separate file. The offshore transactions, payments funneled through shell companies, all linking back to Holt. Colton's fingers tightened into fists. It's not just one case, he said, his voice low. He's been doing this for years. Angela's mind raced. How many people had been falsely accused? How many innocent men had lost their freedom because of him? Noah, still staring at the laptop screen, whispered, Mama, what happens now? Angela forced herself to stay calm. We're going to tell the truth, baby, she said, brushing a hand over his curls. Colton stood abruptly. We need to move fast, he said. If Holt realizes people are looking into him, this could get dangerous. He turned to Angela, his eyes sharp with concern. I want you and Noah somewhere safe. Now. Angela hesitated, but the urgency in his voice left no room for doubt. Colton called over an officer to escort them home while his team prepared to present the new evidence in court. Angela bundled Noah into the back seat of a police car, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. As they pulled away from the courthouse, she noticed her hands trembling. This wasn't just about Daniel Grayson anymore. This was about Holt, about the system that allowed men like him to thrive. Noah, despite his young age, seemed to understand the gravity of it all. He clutched his toy truck, but said nothing, his wide brown eyes scanning the world outside the window. The streets of Chicago passed in a blur. The squad car turned onto her block, stopping outside her house. The officer in the front seat turned to her. Stay inside. Keep the doors locked. We'll have someone outside. Angela nodded. She carried Noah into the house, bolting the door behind her. The weight of exhaustion hit her all at once, but she knew sleep wasn't an option. Hours passed. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Noah had fallen asleep on the couch, curled up with his toy. Angela sat by the window, staring out at the police car parked on the curb. Then something shifted. A dark sedan, its headlights off, rolled slowly down the street. Angela's breath caught in her throat. The car didn't stop, didn't speed up, just coasted past, deliberate like someone was watching. Her pulse hammered. Was it Holt? Was he already onto them? The squad car outside didn't react. Either they hadn't noticed or didn't think anything of it. Angela's gut told her otherwise. She reached for her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed. Colton answered on the second ring. Angela, someone just drove by my house. She whispered, no headlights. It felt wrong. The line was quiet for a beat. Then Colton's voice hardened. Pack a bag. Now. Angela moved quickly, her mind racing. She threw essentials into a backpack, grabbed important documents, cash, anything she might need if they had to leave in a hurry. She knelt by the couch, shaking Noah gently. Baby, wake up, she whispered. His sleepy eyes fluttered open. We have to go. Noah sat up, groggy but obedient. Angela pulled him into her arms, her heart hammering. She peeked out the window. The squad car was still there, but the dark sedan was gone. For now. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. Angela hesitated, her fingers tightening around Noah's wrist. Angela, it's me, came a familiar voice. The officer from outside. She exhaled shakily and opened the door. He stood there, his face tense. We're moving you, he said. Colton's orders. Angela nodded and grabbed the backpack. She scooped Noah up and followed the officer out. The night air felt thick, charged. She slid into the back seat of the squad car. Noah tucked against Noah. The officer started the engine, pulling away from the house. Angela forced herself to breathe, but her instincts screamed that they weren't safe yet. As they turned onto a busier street, headlights flashed behind them. Angela's stomach clenched. A car, dark and unmarked, was following them. We have a tail, the officer muttered, his grip tightening on the wheel. Angela's pulse pounded. Is it him? The officer didn't answer. He picked up the radio. Dispatch. We need backup. Now. The voice on the other end crackled in response, but before they could get a location, the dark car behind them suddenly accelerated. It swerved, trying to cut them off. The officer cursed under his breath, swerving hard to avoid it. Angela clenched Noah as the car lurched. "Hold on," the officer barked. Tires screeched. The unmarked car tried again, forcing them toward a side street. Angela's breath came in short gasps. If they got boxed in, they wouldn't stand a chance. Then sirens. Flashing red and blue lights erupted behind them. A second police unit tore down the street. Engines roaring. The dark sedan immediately veered off, disappearing down a side alley. The squad car skidded to a stop, and the officer exhaled sharply. "You okay?" he asked, glancing at Angela through the rearview mirror. She nodded, though her heart was still hammering. Noah, silent but alert, clung to her. The radio crackled. "Suspect vehicle last seen heading southbound. Officers in pursuit." The officer tightened his grip on the wheel. "They were taking you somewhere safe," he said. Angela swallowed hard. She knew what he meant. If Holt was willing to chase them down, he was getting desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. They drove for what felt like forever, weaving through the city, making sure they weren't being followed. Finally, they pulled into the parking garage of an unmarked government building. Angela carried Noah inside, her nerves still raw. Colton was waiting for them. "You're staying here until we get him," he said firmly. Angela's throat felt dry. "How close is he?" Colton's face was grim. "Too close." He exhaled sharply. "But we're going to put him away. I promise." Angela nodded, but the fear in her gut remained. This wasn't over. Not yet. Angela sat in the dimly lit government safe house, her nerves raw as she clutched Noah close. The walls were plain, the air thick with tension. Colton paced nearby, his phone pressed against his ear, his voice low and urgent. Outside, officers stood guard, their presence a silent reminder that the danger hadn't passed. Angela knew they were safe for the moment, but the weight of the situation pressed down on her like an iron grip. Lieutenant Holt was still out there. He knew they had seen the footage. He knew they were a threat, and men like him didn't run. They eliminated problems. Noah shifted against her side, his small fingers gripping her sleeve. "Mama is the bad man coming." His voice was barely a whisper. Angela swung. He followed the lump in her throat and stroked his curls. "No, baby. We're safe." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure if it was true. Colton ended his call and turned to them, his expression grim. He issued an arrest warrant. He set his jaw tight. "We've got units looking for him," but he hesitated, rubbing his temple. "He's smart. He knows how we operate. He's staying ahead of us." Angela's stomach twisted. "What does that mean for us?" Colton exhaled sharply. "It means we stay put until we find him. I don't want you or Noah anywhere near the public until this is over." Angela nodded, but dread pooled in her stomach. Waiting felt like the worst possible option. Hours passed. The room felt smaller with each tick of the clock. Angela tried to keep Noah occupied, letting him play with his toy truck. But the weight of what had happened still hung in the air. She knew she wouldn't sleep. Every noise made her tense. Every footstep in the hallway sent her pulse racing. She wasn't sure how much time had passed when Colton's phone rang again. He answered immediately, his expression shifting as he listened. Then his eyes snapped to Angela. "We found his car." Her breath caught. "Where?" "Abandoned near the train yards on the south side." Angela's heart pounded. "Does that mean he's leaving the city?" Colton's jaw tightened. "Maybe. Or maybe he's setting something up." Angela's mind raced. Holt was a seasoned cop. He wasn't just running. He was planning. Colton seemed to have the same thought. He turned to one of the officers outside the door. "I want all units doubled around this building. No one in or out without my say." The officer nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Colton ran a hand through his hair. "Angela, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anywhere at all, that Holt might think to find you?" Angela hesitated, her thoughts scrambling. "I don't know. I mean, he knows where I live. He knows my store." Then a chilling realization hit her. "I called her before we left." Angela said, panic creeping into her voice. "I told her we were coming over. But then everything happened so fast. I never followed up." Colton didn't hesitate. He turned to his assistant. Get a unit to her house. Now. The minutes stretched unbearably long. Angela gripped her phone, her breath shallow, waiting for a call, a text, anything to confirm her sister was okay. Then finally, Colton's phone rang again. He answered instantly. Angela watched his face, searching for any sign of relief. But what she saw made her stomach drop. He closed his eyes briefly before looking at her. She's not picking up. Angela felt the blood drain from her face. Oh my God. Colton motioned to one of his officers. Get a team to that address now. I want a full perimeter. The officer nodded and rushed out. Angela felt her chest tighten. She knew her sister. If she wasn't answering, something was wrong. Colton's radio crackled. Sir, we've got movement at the location. Unmarked vehicle parked outside the residence. No sign of forced entry, but curtains are drawn. Possible hostage situation. Angela's knees nearly buckled. Hostage. The officer's voice continued. We're holding position, waiting on your call. Colton didn't hesitate. Go in. Now. The radio went silent. Then a burst of static. Moving in. Angela gripped Noah tighter. Every second stretching into eternity. Then finally suspect is down. Repeat. Suspect is down. Hostage is safe. Angela's legs gave out, and she sank onto the couch. Relief flooded her, but it was tangled with something deeper. Holt was down, but this wasn't over, not really. Colton put a hand on her shoulder. He won't hurt you or Noah again. He said, his voice steady. Angela nodded, but her mind was already racing. If Holt had been doing this for years, how many other victims were out there? How many others have been framed just like Daniel Grayson? What happens to Daniel? She asked, her voice hoarse. Colton straightened. We're getting him out. The charges will be dropped. And then we start digging. Every case Holt was involved in. Every conviction. Every piece of evidence. The wheels of justice moved slowly, but this time Angela knew they wouldn't stop. Days later, she stood outside the courthouse watching as Daniel Grayson walked free, blinking against the bright Chicago sunlight. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, but he barely seemed to notice. He turned, meeting Angela's eyes. A silent understanding passed